Welcome to the fourth episode of the TAQS.IM Middle Eastern Music Podcast. In this episode, Pontic and I interview Peter Deneff, an accomplished pianist, jazz fusion, and ethnic musician who has written many best-selling books for Hal Leonard Corporation. On the academic side, Peter teaches music theory, jazz improv, piano, and music technology. But before we get to the interview, we'd appreciate if you help spread the word about the podcast by subscribing and writing a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you access the podcast. We read all of the reviews, and it really helps get the word out. If you'd like to learn more about microtonality and Middle Eastern music, please visit us at TAQS.IM, click on Education, and then Scales to read our guide to Middle Eastern modal music and the world of maqams. So now, without further ado, here's the interview. Peter, welcome.
Hi there. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Peter, it's great to have you. We've done some gigs together here and there. I've gotten to know you over the years in SoCal, so it's an honor for us to have you on.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you guys for thinking of me and inviting me. It sounds like fun.
Our pleasure. So Pontic has performed with you. I just know you from your discography. For those folks who aren't familiar with your work, can you give us a brief background on you, how you started playing piano keys and the type of music you play?
Yeah, sure. Well, I got started as a kid. We had a piano in the house and music was just kind of there. And I literally was like a toddler, and I would cry unless my mom would push it was like a little playpen. She'd have to push it up against the piano so that I could reach the piano keys and start playing it. And I was like 2 years old, and I've just been playing ever since. By ear at first, then classical piano lessons about 9 years old. All the time sort of listening to whatever the sounds of the house were, which is, a lot of Greek music, growing up in a Greek household. This stuff my brother and sisters were listening to, the Beatles or Bobby Sherman or, whatever was hip, in the early 70s.
And this was all in LA? You grew up in LA?
I grew up in Long Beach, yeah. So yeah, LA area. And then, big Greek community. And it was interesting because, when I was a little kid and we'd go, you guys have been to the Greek festival. You know what that's all about here in this country. Every church does a Greek festival. And, our church here in Long Beach would do one and would have a Greek band playing. And I was just, as a little tiny kid, I was just fascinated by the band. Like I'd see everything, the amps. I'd be like fascinated by the amplifiers, by the drum kit, by the bouzouki. Bouzouki was just like, oh man, that's a great instrument. And then the keyboard player, and I just like, oh man. And so, other kids would be running around playing games, and I would ask my mom, okay, can I just sit here on the stage and actually sit on the stage in front of the musicians and just watch them play? And I would sit there for hours and just watch them play. It was like ear blisteringly loud. I don't know how I have any hearing left. I just caught the bug, I think, when I was a little kid.
Yeah, we can't relate to that at all.
Yeah.
We're cut from the same cloth. We'd go to events, and there's always would be a crew just like standing by the stage and watching.
Do you remember, Adam? We used to film the band for like 5 hours, and then we would try and learn all the songs.
This was pre-YouTube. We would film the band, and we'd be excited if there'd be a dance because we'd get a whole night's worth of footage until the next dance. That's what we'd be playing 24/7, just like that video from that dance. To your point, we'd be doing reconnaissance. What amps are they using? What instruments are they using? What's their setup? Like the whole deal. So
total musician thing.
How old were you guys when you were doing this?
Oh man, pre-teens, early teens. That was when we were like trying to organize as a group. We can't beat you on the 2-year-old thing. That's you got us.
No, that just kind of happened. I had no hand in that. It just happened. But literally, I was probably like 8, 9, 10 years old, 11, and the band was just like, I was just so into that whole thing. And I was playing classical piano. Around 14, I went to Greece and I bought a bouzouki because I just had to learn how to play bouzouki because that sound was just so. I loved that sound. And I just always kind of wanted to play in the band somehow. And when I became 16, through some connections to my godparents, I wound up getting an audition with one of the LA Greek bands that was up and coming and actually became one of the most famous ones at the time.
What was it called?
Real original name. They called themselves the Greeks. It was great. Yeah, you know what we were about. Just the Greeks.
The Greeks. That's awesome.
So I played in the Greeks for 3 years, and it was during that time, actually, I met some of the people that are still my friends today, like Vic Momjan. I met him probably shortly after that time.
Recent profile on TAQS.IM.
Amazing bass player. He still is my number one guy I play with in anything I'm involved in, if I have anything to say about it. Tos Panos, another great Greek musician, drummer, plays all sorts of things around town. I played with him in that band. Two brothers that were great musicians. It was a great experience because I was like a kid. I was like 16 years old, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I had a good ear and decent technique, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we can work with this kid." They were all better than me, and they taught me tons of tunes. Most importantly, I hit the mother lode of LPs, like record albums, because they had probably 1,000 LPs of everything, every Greek song, every singer, Kastantzidis and Dalaras and Glikaria. And I mean, I learned everything there was to know about everything that was Greek music probably within 2 years. It just, back then we would copy LPs and make cassettes out of them. So I'd go to their house and they'd loan me three, 4, 5 LPs at a time. I'd make cassettes out of them and then just listen to the crap out of them, over and over and over again. And it was compilations from classic stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s, new stuff from the 70s, all the standards. They just had a great record collection and they knew good stuff. And so luckily for me, that stuff kind of got in my ear and I memorized, without knowing it, hundreds and hundreds of tunes just by listening to all these things. And so after I left the band, I started playing little Greek cafes and stuff like that and playing with different musicians. But very, very soon after that, I started playing at a place called Athenian Gardens, which was another one of my dreams, was to play in a Greek nightclub, which is a weird dream for a 14-year-old. But I wanted to play at that Greek nightclub, Athenian Gardens, which doesn't exist anymore. But that was the Greek nightclub in LA. Back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. This is underneath before you got here, I think, right?
Yeah, I've been here about 10, 11 years, so definitely.
Yeah, and this place went down the tubes hard in probably 1999 or so.
Oh, wow.
But I played there from about 1989 to 99. I was not even 21 yet, and I started playing 6 nights a week in this nightclub.
Yeah, so what was the scene like? Because in our experience, for example, on the East Coast, there was a really strong Middle Eastern scene, and that's a very broad term with, Greeks, Armenians, and Turks, and Arabs, and Palestinians, Jews, Persians, you name it. What was that scene like, the one that you're referring to? I mean, you're 6 nights a week. That sounds intense.
It was intense because, well, first of all, I was barely 21, but and I was still in college, still going to school during the day, and then going to this gig started 9:00 p.m., and then we would go till all hours, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning. Wow. We'd rarely get out of there at 2. They would just lock the door and we'd be playing, lock the door, keep serving alcohol, keep playing. There was quite a few times I'd come out of there, with the sun coming up.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, that wasn't a good feeling even then, coming up on the wrong side of 6 a.m. But it was a lot of everybody, like you said. And it was a different way of playing because I was used to playing in a Greek band,
Yeah, but this is mixed with different people with different backgrounds, different cultural music styles.
Right. And not only that, but the Greek music was different. We played different and I liked it, but it was different. I was kind of like, how do I put my finger on this? Because we played a little more, what the old timers used to call alla turca music. It was a little more, we call it Skiladika.
Yeah.
Skiladika is literally dog music. They call it Skiladika. It means dog music because of the howling, the singer, this is a very derogatory term, but we use it now, Skiladika, in a very endearing way. But it was music that had that Turkish/Gypsy influence. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the way they play in Thessaloniki, which is like Eastern Greece, closer to Turkey. We had a lot of Pontians and
it's a beautiful city. I've been there. It's gorgeous. I love Thessaloniki.
A lot of Armenians.
Yep.
A lot of Jews. A lot of Gypsies. A lot of everybody in there, and a lot of the musicians are Greek Gypsies, and so you have that influence. Well, that's what you play. In most Greek nightclubs, at least at the time in the 80s coming up in the United States, we played that sort of style. And it was very heavy, very Middle Eastern, lots of tsifteteli, lots of rumba, zebekiko, that kind of stuff. So I learned this whole new repertoire but it goes back to all those records I was listening to back when I was 16, 17 years old. I remember the songs, even though we never played them, but I'm like, oh, I know that song. I know. So I started remembering it, but we were playing it in such a different way, and they would put like different chords, a little more hip. The bouzouki player was very free, sort of, playing a little bit more freely, not so strict as guys would play when we were kids, So it was a great experience. So even though it was rough and I would play 6 nights a week and it was a difficult life and you didn't always get paid, or definitely not paid on time, and there was that whole weirdness to it. But it was like my university because I played and then I was practicing at the time, sometimes 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And then I would go to the gig afterwards and play for another 6, 7 hours because we only got one break there. We play like 6 hours, we'd have 1.5 hour break.
Yeah, that's like legit boot camp, man.
Yeah, even then they were complaining. It's like, come on, guys, you're still going to take too long break, and we're like, okay, it's like, you got to use the restroom sometimes here, folks. Yeah, I know, really. So anyway, but that was cool. But being in that, not only did I learn to play Greek music differently, but I learned about Armenian music because a lot of our clientele was Armenians and made a lot of Armenian friends. And we played for Armenian singers and still friends that I have today, God, I have as many Armenian friends as I have Greek friends because just being in LA, it's inevitable, right? But we played with Harun Kachoyan was one of the first guys that we played with, who was a phenomenal singer, still one of my favorites. And around the same time, I met Yervan, the violinist, who I think I was 21, 22 maybe when I met him. He's a little younger than me, so he was just a kid too, but already just a smoking violin player. And
yeah, he's smoking.
Yeah, and he was smoking back then. And the funny thing is that it was the first time I kind of heard that sort of playing, and he was inspiring to me. Before that, we were playing with Harac Yakubian. I don't know if you guys know Harac. He was a legend back then.
Yeah, name's familiar. Yeah,
huge legend. He used to play on the Hollywood film scores for Warner Brothers and like all the cartoons and stuff like that, Warner Brothers cartoons. This guy could sight read anything, and then his eyesight started going. He put this review together and went to Las Vegas called The Glorious Greeks. And it was a big hit in Vegas, and he had Sporos on bouzouki playing with them, and it was a big deal. And then he came back to Hollywood, big star, and I kind of played with him at the tail end of his career, but it was interesting because he was kind of an older generation guy. Played Armenian, played Jewish songs, played Greek songs, played Fiddler on the Roof, whatever. So we had that sort of experience. So I was just learning all this different stuff from all these guys. But when I started playing with the Armenians, and then I said, and then I found out, there's a different kind of Armenians, not just Russian Armenians. There's Lebanese, and then there's Persians, and then we had this whole Iranian thing happening at the time too. And then I'd go hang out in the Iranian markets and buy cassette tapes with like Martik and all these guys. And I don't know what it was. I was into it. I would drive to high school blasting Martik and, it's looking at me. My own brother, he wasn't into any of this stuff. He's like, why are you listening to all that weird music? Well, can't you just be normal like us? I'm like, no, I don't know. I just like, it's hilarious.
That's so epic.
Crazy. And then we started playing Arabic because, first we had Hovik Grigorian. He's an older generation singer too, and he was singing Arabic, and so I started playing Arabic music, and I loved that. That was like, oh man, this is fun. So I was having a blast learning all these different styles, and they're all interrelated because they're all kind of share, similarities with Greek music. They're all more or less speaking the same language, but just a different dialect.
How did you switch the way you were playing? If you were playing Greek or Arabic or Armenian, did you shift a little bit how you played, or you just kind of all blended it together?
Early on, I think that I blended it together, not with classical, obviously, because that's a whole different bag, but with Greek, kind of blended it together because I was coming from a Greek sort of background, but it was very brief because very quickly I learned they're not the same. And there's big differences between playing Greek music and playing Armenian and Arabic and Persian. They all got their thing, and Turkish. They all got their own thing, and I didn't want to play everything like one way, like a Greek guy. I don't like it when you play Armenian and you play like a Greek guy.
Yeah, I like how you classified it like same or similar language with different dialect. There's like a common thread that runs through a lot of this stuff.
Exactly. And, I don't know if you guys know, but I studied with a really phenomenal jazz pianist named Mike Garson. He's like a legendary piano player. He was David Bowie's piano player for like 25 years, and he's just just an incredible musician, incredible teacher. One of the first things he taught me, not about, Middle Eastern music, but about jazz, he says it's a language. He says, and you don't know how to speak that language, so we have to learn some words and then get you up and running, learning some sentences, and then you'll be able to tell a story someday. And to me, music is very closely related to language. So for me, all the different sort of, for the lack of a better term, all the different Middle Eastern styles, including Greek and Turkish and, Armenian styles, whatever, they're all basically using the same alphabet, we'll say, but slightly different words and slightly different phrasings. But it's all based on kind of this musical vocabulary.
Yeah, and I totally agree with my students. Whenever I get into music instruction, I treat it as language or the ability to communicate musically. So I think that's a very good way to describe it. And you mentioned jazz as a language, and you are also, as you've been saying, you're also familiar with all these different styles of music. So give us your perspective on, for example, jazz compared to modal music or, traditional music, similarities, differences, your experiences working with both, because you're clearly, someone who's experienced in both of those areas.
That's the funny thing about jazz. I was telling Aram earlier today that I didn't come to jazz until relatively late. I never even grew up listening to it. And in fact, I used to get kind of ticked off that, my parents didn't let me hear Charlie Parker when I was a little kid. I would be a phenomenal jazz player by, 18 years old or something like that. But it didn't happen that way. I listened to Greek music when I was a kid. But I started hearing jazz and I liked the sounds I was hearing. But the funny thing is that relatively it took me a long time to figure it out. Like I heard it and I liked it. I couldn't figure out how to replicate that sound that I was hearing, that language. And I was studying with Mike Garson at the time, and he had me learning all the solos and playing along with the recordings and learning how to play like Charlie Parker, like note for note, phrase for phrase, right on top of him. A lot of transcribing. And when I would do that stuff, I would sound really, really good. And then when I would try to play my own solo, I sounded lame, like, some sort of weird Greek guy trying to play a jazz solo. And to the point where my teacher is like, one day I think it had been like literally probably like 8 years since I had started studying with him. And I was probably maybe around 24 years old at the time. I wasn't super young or anything. And I had taken a little break from the guy and I learned a Charlie Parker solo. And when I played a solo for him that I had worked on my own, and then I took a solo myself and everything, and he sat back and he smiled. He goes, hey, that was really great. And I says, thank you. He goes, really, quite honestly, I thought you would never get it.
Straight.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, really? And he goes, yeah, he kind of took me off guard. He goes, no. He goes, not that you wouldn't be great or that you wouldn't have a career, just that you wouldn't get that thing that you just did, which was playing that jazz solo so well. You got it. You learned the language. The funny thing about being a Greek guy trying to learn jazz, in my experience, was we come from a music that's very scale-based and modal, and it doesn't move anywhere, and it doesn't really modulate much. Like maybe you'll go from D minor to F major, like you might have a little relative minor, relative major movement, or
but not like
or in the case of some hipper Greek music, like some of the old stuff that would change scales, like go from one droma, we call droma, you guys call makam, you go from one to another and it will change scales and maybe change tonal centers, but that's the extent of modulation in Greek music, which probably has more modulation than other kinds of Middle Eastern music. But jazz is all over the place, and it's not really scale-based. It sort of is, but when you first play like bebop, it's based basically on major and minor, nothing else. And that was hard for me to wrap my head around because I'm like, well, I can run major scales all day, and this doesn't sound like jazz at all. But if I learn how to play usat, I sound like I'm playing Greek music. So why is that? And so it was a little harder for me to decipher. But then when I did, I'm like, oh, it's how you use the notes. It's how you approach the melodies. It's how you approach the chord changes and everything. So it was a very, very different way of thinking to play jazz. But on the bright side, once I did finally figure it out, it changed the way I played Greek music and Middle Eastern music, because now I'm playing something that's modal, but I'm very free. I can change scales and I can do something else, or I can modulate. I can be in the middle of a TAQS.IM and I can modulate to a different chord and play over a different scale and make it work. And, you know, when I play now with my own group, Synthesy, and I got this great bouzouki player, Danny Papakalos, who's like crazy. He's like an Al Di Meola of the bouzouki. And this guy, he'll just take us on a, you know, like a world tour of TAQS.IM, you know.
Magic carpet.
Yeah,
ride.
we wind up, you know, in China somewhere.
Yeah, I've seen him live with you guys a couple times. He's really something.
Yeah, he's pretty wild.
One time he did like a Frank Sinatra little 2 bars or something from a Frank Sinatra song in the middle of like a Greek traditional thing. It was so funny. Like nobody noticed it unless you were a musician.
Yeah, I think
he just kind of threw it in there, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
It was very.
We were probably playing Zorba the Greek, and he threw New York in there.
Exactly. That's what it was. It was at one of the picnics or festivals I saw you guys at in Northridge.
Exactly, which is coming up, by the way.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
Right. Little promo.
Yeah, a little promo there.
So that's on what, May 25th?
Yeah, it's Memorial Day weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So it's like the 24th, 25th, 26th, or somewhere around there.
So if anyone's in SoCal and you want really good Greek music and good food, you can check Peter's band out, Synthesy, or how do you say it? Synthesy, and they're going to be performing. Yeah, and TAQS.IM will put some info out about that.
Yeah, we're playing at the Anaheim Greek Festival as well with an extended group, clarinet player as well, female vocalist. Oh, nice. Yeah, so it's going to be a fun gig.
Who's the clarinet guy?
Dmitry Bogdanov. Oh, he's a Southern California guy, a great player. He's I think he's Bulgarian, plays all the different styles. Great player for Greek.
Yeah, all the Greek and Balkan stuff.
Yeah, Greek and Balkan stuff. And then we have Lida Saiki. She's a Greek and Turkish singer, fantastic singer, really good. And she'll be joining us for a couple hours, which is nice. And then the following 2 weeks later, January 1st and 2nd, we're in Downey at the Downey Greek Festival. And that's totally off the hook. It's a great festival.
Yeah, it's good to see that you guys are so busy. So I have a follow-up question. Sure. So when you were talking about the jazz versus the modal music and how, you know, you've experienced both and done both for so many years, when you approach or when you play microtonal music, quarter tones or whatever it is that you play, what's your approach? What's your philosophy? Because obviously, in terms of how complex music is these days, you have electronic instruments and fretless instruments and wind instruments, and it's kind of, there's a lot going on. Yeah. We always talk about it internally ourselves. It's one of the things we do at TAQS.IM is we talk about this stuff, we teach this stuff, we learn this stuff. We live and breathe it. So given that you're such an experienced practitioner of that, we'd love to get your thoughts for everybody to hear.
Well, I use microtonality all the time in many different genres, including jazz. You know, we have our group Excursion, which is Greek, Armenian jazz. I have it with Vic Mamjan. I play several tunes where I take a jazz solo and I add quarter tones into it. You know, I'll play like an electric saws kind of sound. And I'm playing jazz, like advanced sort of progressive jazz lines, and then I'll slip into like TAQS.IM sounding stuff, and the quarter tones are in there and everything. And, you know, the Western audiences, they kind of blown away. It kind of takes them off guard when I play like that because they can't put their put their finger on it. They don't know why it sounds the way it sounds because they don't know. They're not used to that sound. But I can tell you right now that the first time I ever heard a quarter tone, I had mixed feelings about it because I went to Tower Records, which is how we used to have to get music back then. The Tower Records was on Beach Boulevard down here in, you know, Westminster. That was the Tower Records to go to unless you were in Hollywood. And they had a great international section. I bought this belly dance record. Some Lebanese dudes. I don't know what it was. I still have the record. They had a keyboard player and they were playing quarter tones and it was like Tsifateli. It was all belly dance music. And I heard it and I'm like, I didn't know at the time it was quarter tones. I had no idea what I was hearing. I just said, wow, that's really crazy sounding music. And I love that. But wow, it left me, like it touched some emotion in me that I couldn't relate to because of the music was so different than Greek music, right? And then we started playing the clubs, as I said, and I didn't have any microtonal keyboards at the time. In those days, there were very few that could pull it off. Like the last version of the Prophet 5, I think, had quarter tones built in. And some of the guys were using Prophet 5s. But I was a Moog guy because one of my heroes, Chick Corea, played a mini Moog. And so I had to have a mini Moog. So when I found a guy got a mini Moog, I bought it for like $300, which was dirt cheap nowadays for a mini Moog, right?
Adam's ears are perking up right now.
$300, and I used it at the nightclub 6 nights a week for like 10 years. And I played at different nightclubs as well. But as I started getting into it, and I also played at a place called La Strada, which was another nightclub in LA, and that was an Armenian place. We're Lebanese Armenians. We played mostly Armenian and Arabic music and European, and so the drummer at the time was a guy named George Sadak, who's an Egyptian drummer, and he started sharing all this Egyptian music with me and teaching me about his dad. Maurice was a very famous oud player. I guess he went by Maurice Roman or something like that, but their last name was Sadat. Grew up in Seattle, these guys, but he was a big deal in the oud playing world. So anyway, he hipped me to all this stuff, and he started showing me Arabic music, and he started telling me, man, he goes, if you want to play this right, you got to play quarter tones. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a good idea, but I don't know how I'm going to make that happen, because there was no way for me to make the mini move make quarter tones. And I was playing Roland keyboards back then, and nothing had quarter tones. And then Roland came out, probably like 1991, they came out with the ASC-10, which was an Arabic scale converter. So I plugged it into I had a JX8P in those days, so I plugged it into that. And now, lo and behold, I had quarter tones. And so, oh man, so now I could really get into it because I was finally able to replicate the sounds that I was missing when I was trying to learn a real Arabic tune. I couldn't play it. And, all I knew about was 50 cents flat. That's what I was taught. You're going to play something, you make it 50 cents flat, and then you're playing Arabic music. And that was good. It was fine. Because I think for Arabic stuff that works, it was basically 50 cents flat, and you're good to go.
Yeah, in the Arabic mainstream, that's pretty much what it's a very blunt, literal halfway point.
Yeah, there's no subtlety whatsoever.
It's just the way it's developed. I mean, regionally, and if you really drill down, you'll get some of the other little, they might be a little above or below, but that's essentially when you hear any recording or anything mainstream, it is that.
And I wonder if it's because of the invention of the quarter tone keyboard that it became that way. Because, in those days, it was either 50 cents, flat or nothing.
Yeah, it added like a measure of consistency. It's like we can all play the same note and we're all in tune on that pitch together, and here we go.
Exactly, right. And it's fine, and it sounded fine, and everything was good. But then when I would get to my real expressive keyboard, which was the Mini Moog, there was no quarter tones. And so I had, out of necessity, developed a technique of being very quick and very sensitive with my pitch wheel to just slightly pull it down on certain notes so that I could get microtones on those notes. And it was effective. It wasn't effective enough for Arabic music, which, like you said, the quarter tones are a little more blunt. But for Greek music, it was plenty good.
Yeah. It gives you the subtlety. Yeah. That little subtlety.
Exactly.
It's like what the Balkan guys do with that, like Casio, that CZ101 that everybody uses. Because I don't think there's any quarter tones built in that. But Amza and like Spurs and those guys, they just use the pitch bend for it.
He's the pitch bend, and that's what I did too. And I didn't know those guys back then because I'm a little older, I think, than those guys. But that's what I did. We didn't have YouTube. If I had, can I cuss on a podcast? If I had YouTube. I tell kids all the time, if I had YouTube when I was like 20, 21 years old, I'll forget about it.
Missed out, man. We get it now when we're like in our 40s.
Yeah, try 50. I just turned 50, but I don't care. I'm
happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm still practicing, so I don't care. I mean, if I get it down by
totally.
If I get it down by the time I'm 90, it's fine. It doesn't matter. But anyway, getting back to your question. So I started off with the pitch bend wheel, and I still, to a great extent, when I'm playing TAQS.IMs, I use a Korg Trident Extreme often now for Greek and ethnic gigs. And what I like about it has a ribbon controller, which is even better. And with the ribbon controller, I can use it kind of the way you would use a fingerboard on a violin, and I can just detune certain things and drag down certain things a certain extent. So that's cool. And then it also has a really good implementation of microtones, but you have to kind of go in and set them. It takes a few seconds to do it, but I can be a little more precise. So what I do today that I didn't do back then, and this is relatively recent, we'll say in the last 5 years since we have YouTube, and I've been able to really check out Husnu or Saleas or some of these violin guys or Amza, Kotis, all of these guys that really have got a very cool sort of grip on the microtonality side of things. And when you hear them play Hijaz, it sounds just a little different than, we were playing Hijaz 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, man.
Right? Totally different.
Their second degree is a little sharp, the third degree is a little flat,
Yeah.
and then the sixth degree, they're doing all that
All
butter.
that stuff. You have your thirds and you have different flavors. Now in my mind, I think of them as flavors. So when I'm playing Hijaz, there's different flavors of Hijaz for me. And so there's different flavors of those intervals. And depending on the tune I'm playing, or maybe even what mood I'm in, I might detune them a little different. But like you said, I'll take the third down maybe 10, 15 cents and take like say you're in D Hijaz, I'll take the E flat up a little bit. And then I'll take the E natural and I'll maybe make that a pure quarter tone, or a little bit less than a quarter tone. And now I've got all these different flavors of notes that I can play with. And that's how I play now. That's my approach now, which I didn't do back then because first of all, I didn't have the means of doing it. And second of all, I didn't have the information. In fact, still, even a few years ago, I was searching around the internet, like, what is the tuning? Like, how are they getting that sound on Hijaz? And there's like zero information about it. And so I had to kind of just use my ear because I had a sense about what's happening, which is another thing too. It's hard when you're coming from a 12-tone world, trying to learn microtones.
Oh, yeah.
You got to train.
Yeah, you know what it is? I went through the same thing growing up in the States. The makam tradition, as much as there is a classical component of how it's written down and there are notes on paper, with the guys I've studied with, and I'm humbled by what I've learned from them, a lot of it is an oral tradition mixed with that, where there's just an understanding of, okay, the paper says this note, but sometimes you play it a little sharper.
Yeah.
And then also with the group you're with, you all have to agree on the same pitch. So there's like other factors aside from the rule, you know what I mean? And it kind of blends it in the character and the flavors, like you said, are very complex.
It is. It's real complex. And the best way I can describe it is there's different shades of the same color, or different flavors of the same taste. And the way I hear it and feel it is going to be maybe different than you or some other guy, and that's what makes it sound a little bit different. Even though you're right, in a classical sense, it should all be like this and this and this. But that's not the way we played in the nightclub. And I don't care what some classical dude wrote down because I'm going to play the way I play now.
And I've even heard, like, for example, Ottoman classical pieces, when different people play them in different orchestras, it's different. The pitches are different.
That's right.
I mean, it's just the way it is. They're like 5-10 cents different, but they're all together, the violins and the tambours and the ouds and the kanuns or whatever, but it's just kind of the spice of that kind of music.
Right. And like I had mentioned before, I came up playing bouzouki too, and there was no quarter tones on the bouzouki. And even though some guys like Paleologo and Kaburidis and some of these guys, they get quarter tones on the bouzouki, but it was like by magic. I don't know how these guys are even doing it, but they did it because they were hearing those sounds and
they're probably bending, like the Azerbaijani guitar players do that too. They bend their guitar strings.
That's right. They're bending, and through the bending and sliding, they manage to give the effect of that thing. So that's me coming out of the bouzouki sort of tradition, and the keyboard tradition of Greece, which was either accordion or farfisa, of which there was very few examples. I didn't have any models growing up in Greek music. There was no models. I had nobody to copy. And in Greek music in those days, like in the 80s, and keyboard was not hip to put in Greek music. They were not using synths. And I think, if I remember back, that was why I was drawn to Armenian music and Persian music and Arabic, because you guys had this sort of like affinity for the
keyboard revolution.
Right. But you guys were so into the keyboards. And I was like, yeah, these are my people here. These are the guys. These guys,
this is amazing.
These guys know and respect what I do. These guys like keyboards. So this is the stuff.
It's no holds barred. It's like, just get the patch, put it on unison, and like, let's go, baby.
It's like a nuclear assault.
And I was creating patches that were like a nuclear assault, imitating the Prophet Fives and the OB8 and that stuff. And I'm like, this is what I'm going to play Greek music like this. So if anything, I play Greek music more Armenian style than I play Armenian like a Greek guy, because to me it was more hip, and I loved that sound.
You're making Adam's day right now.
Portamento, glide, all of it. Just layered all.
The portamento, yeah. But well, that stuff's fun. That's where it's at.
Yeah, totally.
I look, I'm not a purist about anything. I love keyboards. I'm gonna put keyboards in Greek music, like electronics. there's some guys that are like, well, that's fake. That's not real music. And the kanun is a real thing. And blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, it's all real. It's all man-made stuff using the technology we had at the time. Back then, you had wooden strings. Okay, you made an instrument. Now we've got transistors and, whatever. Electronics, we made something that's making a sound you couldn't make 50 years ago. But it's how you use it. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm playing the piano or the accordion, the moog, or stuff that I'm getting into nowadays, because my approach and gear is starting to rapidly transform because the technology is getting crazy now. And it doesn't matter, because as long as you got the chops and the skills and the ideas and you can speak to people, which is what it's all about. It doesn't matter what you're holding in your hands. Just if you're speaking to people, that's what it's about. That's all I concentrate on anymore. Am I speaking to the audience? And when I'm playing a TAQS.IM, is somebody tearing up or getting into it, or raising a glass, or sending me an ouzo to the stage or something, or dumping $50 on my head, whatever. I just know I'm getting a reaction out of the crowd. That's what matters.
Yeah, that's an inspiring message for the way how people think about music and connecting with people, and that's kind of cool to hear from you in terms of how you view that. That's
well, I think if I couldn't get the connection, I wouldn't do it, because that's what I get out of anything musically. That's really my value on this planet, is affecting people in hopefully a positive way. When I say I go out and I play a gig and whatever, how guys are, they're jaded and I'm going to go play this wedding and blah, blah. But my real thing I like to do is, atonal kabuki theater or whatever, some ridiculous thing. And that's cool. If you like atonal kabuki theater, that's fantastic. But when I go play a wedding or a Greek festival, it's because I really love affecting the audience and having that communication with the audience. And my function in this world is having those people's attention for an hour or all day long in terms of a festival. And these people are forgetting about their miserable lives for a few hours, and they're having a good time. And I made that happen. And that's what's beautiful about it. I can't do their taxes, and, I may not be valuable in that way, but I can help them forget about all their miserable problems and their, ungrateful kids and their miserable spouse and their parents that are driving them crazy or whatever, They forget about all that. Once they hear the music, they're happy. They got a smile on their face, they're dancing, and all the cares of the world just melt away. And that's where guys like us are valuable, and people need to wisen up and realize that that's what our value is. And you can't put a price tag on that.
Well said.
You can't download that on YouTube, I'll tell you right now.
For the Armenian stuff, there's keyboards that everybody comes back to. There's the OB8, Prophet 5, even like the D50. I know that's digital. I have a Phantom X6, and the string sound they use is a sampled D50 string sounds. In the Greek genre, what are some of the main keyboards that the keyboard players use?
Oh, classic Greek. Well, the accordion's always been our thing. The accordion was the number one keyboard you use in Greek music. Piano is always there somewhere. And then early on, the farfisas were big. A guy named Vasiliadis he was actually a really great composer. He wrote some huge hits. But anytime you heard farfisa, it was usually him playing. So a lot of guys were using it, but he's the guy we think of when we think of 1960s farfisa music, all the stuff from Kazantzidis. He was the composer and the player. And it was, it was a unique sound. In fact, I have a perfect farfisa sound on the Korg. It just sounds exactly like it, to the point where if I hit that and I play it, the whole band starts busting up laughing, because it's just one of those sounds you have to kind of laugh a little bit when you hear it.
It's in that time.
Yeah, it takes you back to the 60s. Beyond that, there were not too many keyboards. Like I said, there was a real dead zone in Greek music, keyboard-wise. There were some gypsies and stuff that used some of the early monophonic keyboards. It just wasn't developing in Greek music the way keyboards were with the Armenians and
they were thriving with the Armenians.
Yeah, that's why I lost interest. Greek music now is different. There's a lot of keyboards. There's a lot of clarinet is a big thing. Violin, you hear quarter tones in Greek music now. You hear microtonality is a thing. They've really embraced their ethnic roots, the Pontian stuff, the Northern Greek brass band stuff. It's where my dad's from. Huge into brass band music. Trumpet players playing quarter tones and that whole thing. Big drums. And that wasn't the scene when I was coming up. In many ways, it's much more diverse now, and they're incorporating some of our more traditional sounds, zurna and and that kind of stuff. It creeps up in modern Greek music now and you hear it. It's hip. I like it a lot. But that wasn't what I had to model myself on back then. If any of that was happening, it was happening on the underground, like some club in Thessaloniki. It wasn't really happening, in record stores. You couldn't really buy that. It wasn't until much, much later. So there was no keyboard scene. As far as I know, there was stuff that guys were using, but it didn't matter because they turned them down so low you couldn't hear them, or they unplugged them. I don't know what they did. They were standing up there, but you couldn't hear anything.
Unplugged them.
Yeah, they unplugged them. And then there's this guy named Sotiri Skiladika who came around in the 80s, and he was playing the Prophet 5. He had a killer sound back then. For those days, he was a good player. He had some interesting TAQS.IM chops and stuff, and he kind of played things his own way. His Prophet, I think he had a version 3 Prophet with quarter tones, and he started using that stuff. That's when I got a taste for that sort of playing. I never really heard it before then. There was another guy, Spiro Zervas, who had kind of an interesting sound. Yanni Anastasopoulos was another guy back then that had an interesting sound. There was a handful of guys that were good players, and they were using different stuff. A Korg Sigma, early monophonic Korg keyboard. Throw some echo on that and whatever, and it had a pretty decent violin TAQS.IM sort of sound. Nowadays, guys were using the Triton Extreme. Since those were dying and you can't find parts, they replaced it with the Kronos, which is that looks like a beautiful keyboard. That would be my next one if I was going to buy another keyboard. Actually, I use a Yamaha PSR-A 2000. Their Yamaha Oriental keyboard with a Greek-Turkish expansion. It's got some really nice and usable sounds. In fact, I use it at the Baked Potato when we play at the jazz club out here. I'll bring that, and everyone freaks out because it's got Arabic writing all over. Nobody's ever seen a keyboard like that, and I'm pulling up quarter tones on it. Everyone's flipping out and whatever. But I just played with there's a guy named Enrico Macias. He's famous in France. He's an old timer. Mm-hmm. He was like a big name and among the French, and a lot of Armenians and Israelis and stuff know him too. I used that Yamaha keyboard for his concert, and that was like mostly legit European stuff, and it held up for the brass and the strings and all that. Again, but it's very warm and very playable. And that's all I ask. I don't need bells and whistles and sound effects and weird stuff, which a lot of the sounds for the American market are like weird sound effects and stuff that I don't need. I just need
crazy modulation routings and LFOs here and there. And
weird, yeah. Like, okay, well, yeah, I'm gonna stick that song in, Karun Garu, and I'm gonna stick some crazy modulation, torpedo explosion.
You never know.
The molten lava sounds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that'll go over really well. But, the newest thing I'm using is a keyboard app on the iPad, especially my jazz thing. I've been using Korg Module. It's beautiful. Got a beautiful Rhodes sound, beautiful pianos. Strings are gorgeous. It's very playable. Now I'm kind of buying keyboard controllers and I'm plugging them into my iPad and seeing what I can do with that. And that might be the future of what I do because it's light, it's easy to carry. If I'm playing somewhere out of town, my whole rig fits in my backpack. It's getting closer. I think in another few years, I might go completely that way and just carry a couple of iPads with me and, call it a day.
Yeah, we're trying to get there with our TAQS.IM synth. It's not quite stage ready yet, but it's getting there. The scale converter is in development.
That's really promising. A lot of those sounds are really close, like really playable, and Skiladika out. This is what I want. Yeah, this is great.
We're actually working on an oud sample library too.
Some of those instruments are hard to pull off on a keyboard. One of the ones that we use is the clarinet, the Greek clarinet sound, or Greek/Turkish, gypsy style clarinet, Saleas kind of sound. It's hard to make that sound and make it convincing because, first of all, the sound has got to be right. You got to be able to play it right, which that in itself is challenging. And then for the player, it's got to feel right. So even though I know how to make that sound with my fingers, if it doesn't feel right, it's not very inspiring to make that sound. So it's got to be a sound that sounds right, makes you want to play it right, inspires you to play it that way, and then it comes off convincing.
So I have a serious question for you.
I may not have a serious answer.
All right. So if you could go back in time and play a concert with any musician ever in the history of the world, who would it be?
That's a hard question to answer. I think that it's a harder question for someone like me because I speak so many musical languages and I love so many musical worlds. Okay, if you ask a classical guy, okay, if you could go back and, well, yeah, I would love to play with Bach. I would love to do a concert with Bach. That would be an experience of a lifetime. Yeah, okay. I would love to play with the Beatles. I mean, if I could do a concert with the Beatles, yeah, I would play with the Beatles if I could play with somebody. Why? Well, that was early influence, and oh man, just that music just touches you. And what would that be like? Could you imagine to be a Beatle and play in that venue? I don't think we would even know how to wrap our heads around that. So as far as a musical experience goes, that would be one of them. But no, there's so many guys that I would have loved to play with. I mean, Kazantzidis for the Greek stuff, Kazantzidis would have been amazing. Paleologu, the bouzouki player, I would have loved to play a gig with him. Just to get off on that energy that he would put out, and the way, I don't know if you're familiar with his playing, but if you listen to some like live bootleg stuff, an old dearly departed friend of mine, Lou Scobie, hit me to some bootleg recordings that are floating around on YouTube of him playing in the nightclubs back in the early 80s, like back east in New Jersey when Stratos Dionysiou would come out for a little tour. And he would play these tunes that we've played forever, Zebekika and stuff like that. And he would take them so into outer space. He would play the intros and he would just keep going and going and going and going. And his ideas were like limitless. And as far as I'm concerned, for our style of music, he like took bouzouki playing and improvisation and taksims and stuff in a Greek sense to a completely other place, place where most bouzouki players still can't touch it. But yeah, there's so many guys that I would have loved to play with, and in the past, and you can't anyway. You got to move forward. So
it's just a cool podcast question.
It is a cool podcast question. I appreciate that question. There's a lot of cool guys now I would love to play with, and I have to say I'm lucky. I play with a lot of cool guys now, including Vic and Dimitri, Danny, all the guys. They're awesome. I'm lucky that not only do I get to play great music, but we make great music because I always play with great friends, to the point where I can't remember the last time I ever played a gig where I couldn't stand the guy on stage with me. I'm like, that guy, I wish I could, push him off the stage or something. I mean, it's never like that. I always love everybody on the stage with me, and I think that's why the music is so good and why I enjoy it. In fact, at this point, really, I don't play with people unless I like them as people. And then we play. If I don't like them, I don't play with them.
That's fair.
Yeah.
This was great.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. And I love the way you guys are promoting our music and spotlighting all of our projects, which, by the way, if I could do a cheap promotion about Synthesy, our Greek band, Excursion, you can go to excursionjazz.com or synthesymusic.com. Of course, we're on Facebook and all of that stuff. So make sure to follow us and keep updated on what we're doing, and hopefully bigger and better things in the future.
We'll link to everything in our show notes. Peter, thank you again. This was a fantastic conversation. Thanks for taking the time out.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you again for listening to the podcast. You can check us out online at TAQS.IM or search for us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Until next time.